Welcome everyone to our Building Resilience in the Watershed series using the Charles River Flood Model. Super excited to have everyone here. Before we start, I want to share that for tonight's webinar, you do have the option to listen to the webinar in Spanish and English. If you are on your phone, to choose your language, you can click the more icon at the bottom of your Zoom app, which is represented by 3 dots. Within that tab, you'll find the language interpretation option symbolized by a globe. Once you click it, you'll be able to see an option to select for the language you want. When you select your language, you can then select to mute original audio, so you can only choose your chosen language. And if you're on the computer, you should see the language interpretation option right at the bottom of the Zoom as a globe icon. Now I'll pass it off to our interpreter, Camila, to give this instruction in Spanish.
Buenas tardes a todos, bienvenidos. Esta presentación estará tanto en inglés como en español. Para unirse al canal de interpretación, si está en un celular, abajo a la derecha hay 3 puntos. Cuando hace clic allí, va a estar la opción de Language Interpretation o interpretación. Luego de allí hace clic en el lenguaje en el que quiere escuchar la presentación de hoy. Y ponerle mute al audio original y escuchar en done. Si está en un computador, abajo hay un símbolo como un globo. Si hace clic ahí, va a poder escoger su lenguaje y está todo listo.
Great, thank you. And I think Julie will set up the interpretation soon. All right, so as a notice for the audience, we have set the chat function tonight, so you can only chat with the host or co-host in the Zoom meeting. So if you have any technical issues during the presentation, please feel free to send me a chat or my colleague Joanna, as well as any questions you might have throughout the presentation. So welcome again. My name is Deirdre Haniff. I'm the Senior Climate Resilience Associate with Charles River Watershed Association, and I'll be your speaker and moderator for tonight. Here is our slide agenda. We will be covering project background and share some updates on what flood modeling analysis we've done in this past phase, and our outreach work before ending with time for Q&A from the audience. Again, throughout the presentation, please feel free to put your questions in the chat and send them directly to myself or my colleague, Joanna. So as we talk about our watershed tonight, I do want to take a moment to acknowledge that the Charles River watershed resides on occupied territory of the Massachusetts, Nipmuc, and Wampanoag tribes. We acknowledge them as the past, present, and future caretakers of this land, and we acknowledge that a land acknowledgement is not enough, and we continue to learn, grow, and listen to Native voices as we advocate for a resilient future in our work. If you're not familiar with CRWA or Charles River Watershed Association, we are an environmental advocacy organization formed in 1965. Our mission today is to protect, restore, and enhance the Charles River and its watershed through science, advocacy, and the law. And when we say watershed in this context, we are talking about the area of land around the river where when that rain falls on that land, it'll flow and end up in a common body of water, which in our case is the Charles River. On the right-hand side of the slide, you can see the map of the watershed in teal and the river in blue, as well as some of the 35 towns and cities part of the watershed. And with all of our work, but especially with flooding, we take a watershed scale view because we know that what happens upstream doesn't stay upstream, and you'll hear a lot more about that tonight. And when we say flooding in this context, we are talking about having too much water showing up in the same place at the same time, more than what the land or your pipes can handle. And we know that flooding is a natural phenomenon and a natural part of how rivers work. Rivers have floodplains for a reason. They're designed to hold extra water when levels rise. But in today's world, with neighborhoods, roads, and infrastructure built close to rivers, that natural flooding is increasingly putting people and property at risk. In addition to that, we've also turned a lot of our land into impervious surfaces that quickens the accumulation or flooding of water during heavy rain events that add to that growing risk from climate change, where we are seeing more frequent and more intense rainstorms. What you're seeing in this slide is a graphic of design storms, which is, representing specific amounts of rain over a set period of time. And as the name suggests, they're used to design things like drainage system, culverts, etc. And tonight you'll hear us mention, for example, a 10-year storm, which will refer to a storm with a 10% chance of happening in any given year. And the key point of this graphic is that we're still building infrastructure based on today's design storms, which is on the left side. But the reality is that a lot of the things we're building today are going to still be around decades from now, when those future larger storms are going to be more like the right-hand side of the graphic. And as I mentioned, at CRWA, we take a watershed scale approach to climate change, and that's critical in Massachusetts, where we don't have county governments coordinating climate responses like some other states do, which leave most towns trying to handle these big regional climate impacts that don't respect man-made town boundaries on their own. So in 2019, we created the Charles River Climate Compact, a regional partnership of 28 out of the 35 towns in the Charles River watershed. And this group comes together, out of a need and desire to find shared solutions to shared climate challenges like extreme heat, drought, and especially flooding. One of the first needs the group identified was for a regional flood model, something that could show us where and when flooding is likely to happen in the future. And this led to the creation of the Charles River Flood Model, or CRFM. It's an interactive computer-based tool that simulates flooding across the entire watershed using those same design storms we talked about earlier. We also use the model to test potential solutions, especially nature-based strategies like restoring wetlands and adding green infrastructure, which you'll hear about tonight. And you can also see the full project team and the list of involved towns on the right-hand side. So you might be wondering why a watershed approach. One of the reasons for why we decided on modeling at this watershed scale instead of town by town is because it gives us more tool in our planning toolbox. For example, it gives us the opportunity to look at a full stream and find opportunities upstream to store more water, protecting downstream communities. In the middle, you can look to store more water or adapt how water is conveyed or moving downstream. And at the downstream or lower watershed, where it is more urban or dense, we can consider how to move water away from properties and people. And so this is really the basis of the modeling designs and results you'll hear about tonight. All right, with that, I will be passing it off to our other speakers for the night. The first speaker you'll hear from is Claire Rendelli. She is the environmental planner and conservation agent for the town of Natick, where she's been for the past 4 to 5 years after serving 4 years for the city of Newton. Claire has been the municipal representative for the town of Natick and also serves as the municipal lead for the project funding. You'll also hear from Julie Wood, Climate Resilience Director with Charles River Watershed Association. She's been a longtime member of our staff, having joined the organization in 2007. Julie manages the Charles River Climate Compact and serves as the project manager for the flood model project. Indrani Ghosh is the senior technical lead for Weston Sampson. Indrani has more than 14 years of experience as a water resources engineer and as a technical lead in climate change resiliency projects, and has been involved with the project since the beginning. Jenny Moonen is the senior project manager and engineering team leader for Weston Sampson. She is a Massachusetts registered professional engineer with over 18 years of experience working with communities of all sizes across New England to provide drinking water, stormwater, and wastewater services. And last but not least, Lee Mounier. She is the program manager at Communities Responding to Extreme Weather, or CRWA, and she's been with them since 2018, both as an organizer for their annual Climate Interface Summit and a member of the local crew chapter in Somerville. With her team at Crew, Lee coordinates much of the project's community engagement work, which you'll hear about near the end of the webinar. And with that, I will pass it off to Claire.
Thanks, Dira. Oh, and the slides didn't update, but that is not a problem. So my name is Claire Rendelli. I'm the conservation agent here in Natick, and I have had the pleasure of working with Julie and the CRWA and Weston Sampson team for about 5 years or so on this project as a whole, as well as being a member of the Climate Compact since its initiation. Natick has been really lucky to serve as the fiscal lead on the regional project, because the regional perspective on these larger stormwater issues has really been so key in helping us understand how we can address these problems. Not only have we learned so much from the other communities and the work that's being done there, like in Watertown with their stormwater bylaw, we were also lucky enough to be selected as a community with a priority project site in 2023. The concepts that were developed were for the Natick High School area. We have a large public swimming pond that is abutted by our high school, as well as a facilities yard. And there were demonstrated improvements and opportunities available in this area to assist with mitigating future flood conditions, as well as some local benefits for stormwater runoff quality improvement as well. Over the last year, we've been working under an additional MVP grant to design a feature at this location to capture and treat stormwater that's entering our public swimming pond, as well as reducing the flashiness of that system, as it is about a 500-acre watershed that drains to that singular point here in town. And so we're really looking forward to being able to move that project into permitting over the next year, funding awarding pending. But we're also just really looking forward to seeing all of the additional work that happens throughout the region over the next year of the flood model work under our current MVP grant, to really learn from our other communities as well, the solutions that are working for them.
Great, thanks so much, Claire. And so it's great to hear from your perspective. Claire has to leave because she has another important town meeting to attend, because the work never stops even after 5 p.m. But if you need to contact her, you can definitely find her on the Town of Natick's website.
It's not hard to find me. Thanks all.
Thanks, Claire. And with that, I will pass it off to our partners at Weston and Sampson.
Thanks so much, Dira. As Dira introduced me, I'm Jenny Moonen from Weston and Sampson, and we're going to spend a little bit of time sharing some of the strategies that we looked at this year that could look at both green infrastructure as well as gray infrastructure. Just before we move into the analysis that we did, I just want to remind people what the differences are, right? So gray infrastructure is those pipes in the ground, the gutters along the road, those, catch basins, which look like a waffle along the edge of the road, and all of that infrastructure that moves stormwater from the developed environment to our wetlands and water bodies. And green infrastructure are practices that basically are bringing nature back to the built environment. They can filter stormwater, they can put it back into the ground, they can uptake it, or basically soaking it up where it falls. And they offer so many multiple benefits, right, to having them. And there also are ways to combine these practices. You can mix them up and have green on the surface and gray underground, and take a hybrid approach. Just a few examples so folks can see photos. Oh gosh, excuse me, my slides have gone black on me. Okay, I'll bear with me, folks. Just a few examples. You can see photos of these, right? Catch basins and pipes, outfalls, and even underground storage. And here, next slide, are some photos of green infrastructure.
Sorry, I am just having a bit of trouble moving the slides, but sorry about that.
So here are just some examples right in the top right, top left, you see rain garden, bioretention, and some permeable parking, as well as a vegetated swale. So just so folks can visualize what these look like. And the last example is just a combo. So what we did is we, yes, thanks, Andrani, just a combo where we did green on the surface and put all sorts of underground storage, which are shown in the left photo. There are those black boxes you can kind of see in front of the red house. We identified an area to evaluate for combination of green, gray, and green-gray solutions in Dedham, in this catchment outlined in blue, so you can see where it is in the watershed. And one of the reasons we picked this catchment is there is very good mapping of the drainage system in that area, and there's also quite a mix of very, very developed areas as well as critical infrastructure and residential areas. So just so folks have a sense of, really where this is, it's right north of the interchange between Interstate 95 and Route 1. There's a number of, like I said, infrastructure, important areas, right? Legacy Place, Wigwam Pond, the mall, Dedham Plaza. The river goes through this catchment, the Charles itself, as well as Louder Brook. There's the town hall, the middle school, and even the commuter rail station. So quite a bit to think about mitigating flooding for.
So as Jenny explained, we picked this area because we had also good understanding of what the drainage infrastructure, the stormwater drains, the catch basins, the manholes look like in this area. We added a lot of details to the model that was developed as part of the regional efforts. The original regional Charles River flood model that has been developed, which we've talked about at past meetings. We incorporated a lot of additional detail for this area to better understand what flood risks are at this location. The image on the left here, it shows the model output from the past flood modeling effort, which didn't have as much detail because it was a regional model. In this area, when we added more understanding or better understanding of where the drainage pipes are, where the catch basins are in our communities, where the manholes are, that gave us a better understanding of where the flood risks are. As you can see by a quick comparison between the two, we saw new areas of flood risk emerge. We also saw areas where flood risk were worsened compared to what we saw in previous iterations. And this shows an image of a 10-year storm of the future that shows exacerbated flooding in this region. As a result of these greater extents of flooding that we are seeing, we're also noticing that that implies that we're having to manage more volume of floodwaters to keep them away from our properties, from our critical infrastructure, from locations where priority populations are in the watershed. So this sort of gives us a sense of scale of how much additional flood volume are we talking about. So this image here that you were seeing shows a combination of two types of storm events: the 2-year storm, which is about like a storm that has a 50% chance of occurring in any given year, and a 10-year storm that has about a 10% chance of occurring in any given year. And as you can see from here, that the volume of flooding that we would have to manage if we do nothing between today and the future is about more than 50 million gallons for a 2-year storm, and about 90 million gallons for a 10-year storm, which is a lot of flooding to deal with. And that implies that the floodwaters will overtop our the existing banks of the rivers and cause negative impacts to critical infrastructure, residential property, and various other impacts on priority population groups. One of the important things to remember of this project that we set at the beginning and we've discussed with you all prior, are the goals of this project. As Dira and Jenny have mentioned, that one of the central goals of this project was such that we are not going to make future flooding impact critical infrastructure. Schools, hospitals, community centers, emergency shelters would need to be protected from the future impacts of flooding. We would also need to mitigate the flooding to environmental justice neighborhoods, as well as priority population groups that live in the watershed. And we would not want to make the flooding impacts as we see today any worse than in the future. And that was really one of the central themes. That last bullet on the slide is one of the central themes of how we have evaluated success and flood mitigation benefits of the different strategies that we are presenting today. So we talked about what our mitigation target is. Now, if we look at that 2-year storm, which is a more frequent storm, as we explained, right? A storm that has a 50% chance of occurring in any given year. We are talking about an additional 54 million gallons of flooding or flood waters that we would have to manage in our communities, in our neighborhood, to make that future storm no worse than it is today. This lists a few potential opportunities or strategies that we can look at to mitigate that additional flood volume. We could do that by reduction of impervious area. So think about if we could depave some of the existing parking lots or hard paved surfaces that we have, or we could find opportunities to redirect the stormwater runoff from those locations to places of where we could store that runoff. Could we store that stormwater runoff underneath existing parking lots, underneath existing paved surfaces? Could we also potentially consider storing some of that runoff underneath existing pervious locations, such as open spaces, parks, which potentially can we convert them into floodable spaces and have them then drain post a storm event? So those were some of the strategies that we evaluated to manage the future storm water flood volumes. And as you can imagine, we are talking about a tremendous amount of flooding that we would have to manage in our communities. And for this watershed, that translates to more than 54, as we talked about, what you can think of is equates to about 125 football fields, storing up to 1 foot depth of water. And that sort of gives you all a sense of how much additional space will be needed in our communities, which we don't have, which are already over-programmed to manage this kind of flooding.
So we looked at, as we mentioned, adding green infrastructure, as well as creating underground storage and creating spaces where we could infiltrate water back into the ground. We also looked at those sort of watershed-wide in Dedham in this catchment area. The site-specific practices, because of the submodel, we were actually able to zoom in and look at a number of different strategies, like adding more catch basins, so giving the water more places to get into the drainage system, changing catch basins to infiltrate. And one of the things we found from that exercise is that even like 700 catch basins, if we replaced them, and instead of them connecting to the pipes, they actually put water back into the ground, we would actually see, a modest flood reduction benefit there. And certainly we see localized flood reduction benefits. We also looked at drain upsizing and rerouting, and I'm going to talk about a few of those practices in a minute. We ran all of this through the submodel that we developed. And so we had found about, almost 60 opportunities for green infrastructure, and that alleviated 2 million gallons of flooding. And it also reduced the amount of what we call effective impervious cover, and that's basically taking the driveways and the parking lots And instead of them going into the drainage system, now they go into these practices. So it's effectively reducing that impervious area. The way Indrani was talking about, it's one of the strategies that we can employ as a mitigation for flooding. We had a significant number of large-scale gray infrastructure opportunities as well. And those did in the modeling mitigate almost 30 million gallons. So in total, we got to just over 31 million gallons and 62 acres of impervious reduction, which is pretty significant. But we learned communities really have to think about both green and gray together. One or the other is not really going to solve everything, and that there's always more to do than we expect. Even in this catchment, we came up with a very aggressive approach, and we're still 20 million gallons away from our 54 million goal that Indrani was talking about. We did find some favorable things when we looked at, for example, drain upsizing. So you can see on this chart on the left, this is flow in cubic feet per second. And if for those of you who aren't familiar with that, it's, imagine a bucket being dumped out every second. That's 1 cubic foot per second. So if you have 50 CFS, it's 50 buckets being dumped out every second. And on the bottom of the graph, you'll see duration. And so this is telling us in this little area of Dedham, if we upsize the pipes, we can actually reduce, and if you go to the next slide, Indrani, we can reduce the peak of the storm, right? When the flooding is at its highest, during when we have kind of the most rain and all the water is aggregated together. We can get that lower. That's what the green line is showing us. So we had some very favorable results when we employed a drain upsizing practice. So just to summarize quickly, CRFM, the flood model and the submodels help us understand the scale and the sources and all the strategies to manage present and future flooding. The more and more we explore these sub areas, we see in the results how the areas of land are different. We've been taking a goal to get that peak storm, as I talked about, to pull that and reduce that so that there's less flooding when the rain is heaviest. Green solutions do help reduce flooding. They reduce localized flooding, they carry many GOHO benefits, but we are seeing gray solutions can't be ignored. Ultimately, a combination of green and gray policy, as we've talked about in many other previous meetings, flood proofing, and even in some cases, ultimately retreat will be the way to achieve total mitigation.
Jenny, while we transition to our next section here, pipe upsizing, just to be super clear about that is just changing current pipes with larger pipes. Is that correct?
That's a perfect way to explain it, Julie.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. So we'll just spend a few minutes. Yeah, Indrani, go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you, Julie, for that clarification, and Jenny for presenting the combination of gray and green infrastructure opportunities. Another very unique opportunity that we explored in this round, which we are very excited to share our findings with, is related to how better can we manage open surface water bodies, ponds, reservoirs in our watershed, such that we can almost use them as an aid for flood mitigation to reduce impacts of flooding in our communities. So one of the things that we looked at in terms of better managing flood mitigation options by looking at how better we can manage ponds is related to how we operate our ponds in advance of a storm event, which essentially relates to, could we potentially draw down the pond before a storm and create additional flood storage within that existing surface water body and reservoir? And we could also potentially lower the outlet through which the pond drains or discharges, and in the process, create additional flood mitigation storage. And we could tie those operations with storm forecasts, with real-time controls. If we do that in advance of a storm, we know a big storm is coming. What if we are able to improve our operations for these reservoirs and surface water bodies so that we are able to create additional flood storage? What would that yield in this watershed? So there were two locations that we looked at this. We looked at this at the Mirror Lake Dam, and we looked at it at the Red Dam. At both these locations, we had some differences in how these dams and the reservoirs behind the dams are sort of configured. The Mirror Lake Dam has about 2 feet wide stop logs. The Red Dam has about 45 feet long weir. Approximate elevations of these dams are noted. The bottom lake elevation are noted here. The Mirror Lake Dam is about 3 feet deep. The Red Dam is about 4 feet deep. The discharge area associated with the Mirror Lake is close to 140 acres. Whereas for the Red Dam, we're looking at a much larger drainage area of about 8 square miles. So what we looked at when we evaluated the effects of being able to draw down the reservoirs behind these dams in advance of a storm by effectively looking at drawing them down, drawing them at different elevations, but also drawing them at certain hours before the storm, we saw some flood mitigation benefits. So let me walk you through that, please. The line here in light blue corresponds to the baseline flooding that we would see for a 2-year storm of today, a relatively frequent storm of today. When that happens in the Mirror Lake area, we would see that the floodwaters have exceeded. The dashed line here corresponds to the normal pond elevation. With a 2-year storm, that the floodwaters would exceed this elevation that is shown in light blue here. And if we do nothing, that elevation is likely to be this darker or brighter blue for the future storm. Now, if we are able to better operate the dam, the reservoir behind the dam, by potentially drawing it down 12 hours in advance of a storm, and we use a 1-foot outlet, we do see some improvement in flood reduction with respect to the dam, with respect to the flood elevations. And if we looked at a couple of other strategies where we looked at an 18-inch pipe outlet with 24 hours of pre-storm drawdown, and that got us even better or improved flood reduction benefits at this location. And the most significant flood reduction benefit that we saw at this location was when we had, coupled with drawing down the pond in advance of the storm 24 hours, and coupled that with a 1-foot box outlet, we saw some pretty significant flood reduction benefits. They could be localized, but they were significant with respect to elevations. Now you can see that this is somewhat of an exaggerated scale here, but we do see some promising results that would show localized flood reduction benefit for a fairly frequent storm event from what it could likely be in the future. So we were able to demonstrate effectively and we saw similar results as this at the Red Dam location. So we were able to conclude that if we can couple flood drawing down a pond with effective outlet control structures, we are able to create meaningful storage in this location. And if we are able to replicate this at multiple locations within the watershed, we may see some significant flood reduction benefits at the regional scale and definitely at the local scale. However, it is worthwhile to note that permitting requirements, utility conflicts, etc., that will need to be factored in for evaluating these types of strategies, and finally implementing them at these locations would definitely need to be considered, and those were not evaluated in greater detail at this higher level conceptual evaluation. I'm going to now pass it on to Julie to
Yes.
talk about the next section.
Yes, excellent. Thank you so much, Indrani. So we've seen so far tonight the neighborhood scale in Dedham with the gray and green combo approaches, and then, or the neighborhood, or what we call the subwatershed scale. We've also seen the pond storage at, again, a more neighborhood scale or subwatershed scale. Transitioning into the last strategy we're going to talk about tonight is at the site scale. And so we have two sites to share with you. At the very beginning, Claire mentioned that one of our previous sites chosen in this project was in Natick. That's just one of many we've already done, and we're going to share two new ones with you tonight. So as this project has been going on for about 5 years, we early on understood what either you already understood coming into this, or you are seeing as these results are presented. We need aggressive action to adapt to climate change. These storms we're showing you are 2070 storms, so we have some time, but we should really start to act. So pretty early in our work, we wanted to identify some very actionable projects. So the pond outlets reconfiguration that you just saw would be in that category. We also identified some site projects. So how did we do that? First, we developed a method for picking and prioritizing sites. Obviously, across a 300 square mile watershed, there's a lot of opportunities. So we had to develop a methodology to prioritize those. And we did that based on feasibility factors, technical factors, and project priorities. We then reached out to collect project ideas. Most of the ideas come from our municipal partners. We are always welcoming of ideas that come from residents, though. We have one of our first priority project sites was suggested by a group of residents. So if you have an idea in your community, we want to know about that, and our contact info will be at the end. And then once we have a collection of sites, we apply that selection methodology to identify our priority projects. Next slide. In addition to the site in Natick, at Natick High School that Claire mentioned, here's just some other examples. Alderbrook and Needham was something we identified last year. Typically, we recommend a suite of ideas, some that might be turned around in the next year, some that might be, ready for planning half a decade out. So we try to do a mix of things, and we're focused on both flood reduction and meeting other community goals. This Hardy Pond Waltham project is actually the one that was recommended by residents, and it involves using the pond for storage and restoring some adjacent wetlands. Next slide. These are all the past priority sites we've had in this initiative to date. As you can see, most of them are advancing. We are very excited. One of our first ones in Newton is currently under construction, literally as we speak. So that's very exciting. And we, as a group, work to move these forward so that we can get started preparing and be more ready for our climate change that is coming. Next slide. Here are the results of this year's prioritization process. 2 sites, one in Lincoln, the Ballfield Road or Stony Brook corridor, right by the school and future site of the community center. And then West Roxbury, the Sawmill Brook Pond and wetland adjacent to the former site of the West Roxbury High School. Next slide. So we're just going to talk through these, starting with our Lincoln project. So just a locus map there for where we are. The impervious cover is primarily driveway and roadway, surrounded by a significant amount of wetlands and stream area. Next slide. What our goals were for this particular site, treating stormwater runoff coming off the paved areas, critical for water quality, critical for flood. We also identified some erosion issues that can be signs of fast moving water. Wanted to address those, address some ponding issues as well. Provide ideas that could be incorporated into some future conversations going on about this corridor. So maybe some traffic changes coming to this that the town is just kicking off a planning process on. So we want it to be flexible, have things that could be incorporated here or one way or the other. And then restore the health of some of the surrounding stream areas. And the forested areas. So the recommendations for this site include bittersweet removal. That's an invasive vine that kills trees. So cut it and let those trees be healthy. Wetland restoration and stream restoration to the north of the road, north and west of the road. The stream to the, north and east. The stream to the southwest actually look very healthy wetland there. But to the north, some wetland restoration potential to improve the habitat quality and add flood storage, and the stream restoration as well. And then a bunch of areas where we can add smaller stormwater treatment systems, and those provide those storage as well that Jenny and Andrani were talking about. And then finally, a small area where we can just get rid of some impervious cover. So once we have these designs, we hand them over to our partners at Weston and Sampson for them to run them through the Charles River flood model. So Jenny will share these results.
Yeah, so this site actually performed really well. What you're seeing here is a graph of how effective the strategies that the Charles River Watershed Association folks came up with do to reduce the increase from that 2-year storm. So the bar on the left that's dark blue is showing the runoff volume that you might see under present day conditions under a 2-year storm event, and then that increase in the middle bar in the 2070 timeframe. And look at the decrease, right? Like, look at how much is offset here. It's an 82% reduction in flooding from the projected 2070 storm. And it almost gets to being equal to our present day anticipated volume. So it's quite effective. They managed to get rid of 25% of impervious cover in this catchment and create 0.4 million gallons of storage. So that's how the model shows the effectiveness of these results.
Thank you. And our second site that we're going to present tonight is what we're calling our Sawmill Brook Pond and Wetland in West Roxbury. So there were a few unique site considerations in this area. The former high school site is something that's likely to be rehabilitated in the city of Boston. However, there's no consensus on what will happen there. So we just ignored that piece of the parcel, and the city will go through their process that they need to go through, but we weren't there yet. It's also adjacent to a capped landfill. Those athletic fields you see are partially on a capped landfill, so we also wanted to stay away from that. In this area, the flooding concerns are mostly downstream, so that was really what we were trying to address here. We actually fortunate this wetland looks very healthy, and at one point there appears to have been an educational trail there, and it just hadn't been maintained or kept up, so some opportunity to bring that back. Another interesting thing, we identified that previously there was a flood control structure. That pole in the middle there is attached to a crank that appears to raise and lower something that would go in that orange track, a flashboard or something like that. So interesting piece of infrastructure put in at one point can maybe rehabilitated or rethought in the age of climate change. Next slide. So I mentioned, so these are the recommendations for this site. I mentioned the outlet control already. The photo you were seeing is that dot in the middle of the design recommendations. We're also recommending it to the west a bit at the outlet of the pond. So the outlet of the pond and between the wetland and the pond. Also some room for invasive reduction here to keep that forest healthy by eliminating bittersweet. As I said, the wetland really looked pretty healthy. There were only a few areas where we saw a potential opportunity for wetland restoration. And then adding some additional storage along the banks of the pond by restoring some wetlands or just adding some area to hold more water. Ponds hold water, that's what they do. So they are a good potential area to hold more water, as you've heard tonight. And then similar to the Lincoln area, just adding some smaller storage areas, bioretention or infiltration trenches or infiltration basins. Those just collect the water and hold it in one place safely and allow it to seep into the ground over time. And Jenny will share the modeling results for this one.
Oh, sure. Is this the, well, the graph actually is not the quite right graph, but that's okay. We'll give you some highlights. This site didn't actually perform as well as the Lincoln site, unfortunately. I think this is actually a copy of the Lincoln graph. Apologies for that. But there's this area, this catchment that the project site sits in is significantly larger than the Lincoln catchment and has significantly more impervious cover. And so the practices that were identified for this site did reduce flooding just a bit, only by about 10%. And there was a reduction in impervious cover, but on the catchment as a whole, it was really only about 1%. So the reasons that the regional model don't show as favorable results for this site are just because the catchment is so large. But the practices, if you were to do a submodel at this site, would show quite a bit of benefit in that localized area as well as directly downstream.
We can would not be a Zoom meeting without technical difficulties. Should we update this, Jenny, and loop back after Lee's
Sure,
portion?
yeah,
Okay.
I did put that in the folder for Dear. I think we just maybe
Okay.
copy.
Excellent.
Yeah.
All right. And now we will hand it over to Lee to talk about the exciting in-community portions of the project.
Fantastic. Can everybody hear me okay? Yes, I'm seeing some nods. Awesome. Okay. Thank you. And actually, I maybe just on top of what Julie you just said, part of what I love coming to this space because it gives me and our team at CRWA an opportunity to not in sharing this information with you all, we get to celebrate all the work. Sometimes when you're immersed in it, I don't know how others on this call feel on the team, but when you're immersed in it, it's hard to kind of, see the fruits of your labor, right? Of the conversations you've had, the projects that come from the engagement. So anyways, I just am grateful for this space and to be with you all tonight because it's an opportunity, not just to share with you all, but I think for myself and I think for our team, an opportunity to really, sit with and celebrate the work that we've been doing. So I just this title slide here, evolving engagement for CRFM. Sometimes I can get caught up in a title, but this feels especially important for this phase of the project because in past phases for Charles River flood model, we have really continued to think about how we're meeting communities where they're at and meeting the moment. And so, you know, the first year that we worked on this project with CRWA, it was in the first year of COVID. So, you know, that was in a virtual space and bringing people together in the Zoom, and which was obviously a lot different than where we're at now, right? So I'd say last year and this year, a lot of the evolution, as mentioned in this title, is a focus on workshops. So you'll see in the slides ahead, a lot of what I'll be sharing with you all is a little bit about overarchingly what we're doing around engagement, but really with a focus on the workshops and what they're revealing, what residents are sharing, and then also, you know, what we're learning from workshops thus far and will inform the work going forward. So yeah, I just want to quickly just give an introduction to CRWA for anybody who's not familiar with us. Communities Responding to Extreme Weather is the acronym CRWA. And really, you know, a large focus of our work is on really building out a network and working with the broader network across the general region and statewide and nationally, depending on what part of CRWA you're talking about. And in connection with CRWA, we've been in partnership on this project, serving as basically the community engagement arm, as mentioned, since 2021. So in the days of COVID. Yeah, next slide. Thank you. So in terms of engagement, so I want to start in a place of just kind of talking in terms of the numbers, and then we can get more into the anecdotes and I think the more qualitative aspects of the work. So what engagement looked like overall for this past phase, and when I'm saying a phase, what I'm really talking about is about the last year or so, coming into the end of this month. We'll be wrapping up the phase. We you know, attended 8 community events. As you'll see in subsequent slides, I'll just talk a little bit about what kinds of community events we go to. We had the opportunity, and we have this ongoing opportunity, to present at the annual Non-Point Source Conference, which is an amazing opportunity for us to connect with, you know, other watershed associations, nonprofits, planners, government officials who are coming together to learn from each other and share, you know, experiences around water, not just managing water, right, but how we're being responsive to climate impacts and responsive to the needs of communities regarding issues of water. And then, as mentioned, we've, you know, workshops has been the real kind of crux of the work. And we so far have had the opportunity to facilitate 7 workshops this phase. We actually do have a couple more. We're going to be sneaking in this month, which I'll talk about before the end of June. Just to celebrate more, I mean, 500 plus, it's definitely more than 500. I think we just, you know, but it's 500 people that we've been able to reach across those events mentioned, the conference and the workshops. And then just some of those groups that we have an opportunity to connect with in those spaces, depending on where we are. So, you know, one collective that we really want to focus on is non-English speaking residents across the watershed. A unique group that we connected with this phase are farmers, and then thinking again about climate vulnerable communities, thinking about you know, community elders as well. The workshops themselves thus far have been around an hour to an hour and a half each. We were reaching out to, you know, different collectives, different institutions and communities to see who might be willing to partner with us to bring a workshop to their community. And what the workshops basically include is, as mentioned here, you know, is an introduction to the flood model work, and also CRWA, and then an opportunity for us to not only get feedback for some of those nature-based solutions projects that other teammates have talked about, but as you know, the work of CRWA is often focused on extreme weather preparedness. So we also see these workshops as an opportunity to help prepare communities. As mentioned, you know, the workshops are the focus, but we have also been out at watershed events and festivals. So this is just lifting up on the left some of those examples in Natick at the Maple Magic Pancake Breakfast, Newton Earth Fest. So those are places that we've returned to over and over again, because those have just been great places for us to reconnect with the same communities. It's really important in community engagement to return as often as is feasible, to build relationships and trust and let people see you over and over again there. And then new opportunities. This past year, we went to Harvest Fest in Franklin, and are also seeing some more low-key opportunities for tabling at farmers markets. As mentioned, workshops have been the focus, thinking of, you know, who are some ongoing groups that we could connect with, as well as some new groups. So housing developments has been something across last phase and into this phase. Because again, a lot of the reason for that is, you know, when you're in a housing development, we see those as neighborhoods within themselves. So when we're going to a housing development and holding a workshop, it's an opportunity to not only connect with a collective of people where they already are, right, which is on site in a place that they are intimately connected to and might be experiencing flooding, but it's also an opportunity for us to actually frame things for residents as, you know, this is your neighborhood. We want to make sure that there's care here amongst you all, you know, when there's a crisis like flooding. And yeah, and then in terms of some other groups that we've also been prioritizing this phase are farmers and indigenous collectives as well, like the North American Indian Center of Boston. Next slide. So just wanted to lift up some of the things that we've learned on this slide, or just showcasing some, you know, as we've been holding workshops, we have some key questions that we do ask over and over again. A lot of those questions, as you can imagine, are trying to get at kind of all aspects of flooding with residents. So it's everything from like, what are your concerns and experiences, to what are your insights or ideas? What do you need more of in order to feel not just supported, but empowered to respond to flooding issues? I just looked up this quote because I thought this was powerful. One resident really, I think, poignantly recognizing that we are on borrowed time here, right? So people think a lot about like Hurricane Sandy. You know, if it had been, the tides had been a little bit different when that hit, or that just in terms of a couple hours later, we would have been at the center of that, right? So just thinking about how important this work is that we're doing, because you know, time is precious and we actually are, again, on borrowed time. So in terms of some of the concerns, a lot of them are, you know, listed here, but just a couple that I wanted to lift up. One that was, you know, people are very concerned and very aware of kind of this jump back and forth between droughts and flooding. So a lot of our conversations with communities, as much as flooding is the focus, do also touch upon other climate impacts. People are obviously really concerned about health in their communities. And then I just lifted up unskilled development, because that is just like everywhere we go, this continues to be a concern that's lifted up. And it's just, people are concerned about development in terms of clear cutting, zoning, building in floodplains, how much we're sort of focused on, you know, on owners' rights, as opposed to like when you chop down a tree, the impacts on the broader neighborhood and community. So these are things that are coming up over and over again. And then just other ideas that people had. I want to lift up the first one that's there that I thought was a great idea. So often we found in conversations that town planners and residents were just sometimes kind of missing each other, right? So residents were coming forward in these workshops and frustrated that something wasn't happening. And then we'd have a town planner there with us to say, we actually are doing that work, you know? And so we found out it's not always just that something is not happening in a community, but often planners, and as you can see with these projects that are being highlighted tonight, a lot of work is happening. It's just that residents are not sure what that work is. So in addition to finding different kinds of communication mechanisms, like, you know, social media, email, newsletters, another idea was just simply signage. So just thinking about how planners can be more skilled in communities about, like, if there is a project or something is changing in the community, to just make sure you have signage on site so that people can see not just the land changes that are happening, but have an explanation as to why. Next slide, please. So I just want to also lift up quickly some of the things that we had learned from what one particular mechanism we had for collecting information, and that was simply an exit survey. So at the end of every workshop, we do just ask people to take this opportunity to give us some feedback, right? Like from beginning to end, where are people at now? So just on a scale of 1 to 5, we're finding pretty consistently that people are changed, right? By the end of our workshops, they're feeling more knowledgeable on what the impacts are, what solutions exist. And the piece that I feel most important, especially with crews work, is really about connection. Because quite often when there's a crisis, it's not just about how you can respond at home, you know, or in your family, in your neighborhood, but a lot of it is really just about your relationship to community. So, and if there's a crisis like a flood, coming out on the other side more resilient, stronger, safer, healthy, is not just about the flood itself, but is also about your connection to community. So to know that our workshops are helping facilitate that kind of connection is really powerful. In terms of the workshop spaces, just want to give a heads up for what we're hearing that's going to inform our next stage. And some of the key points that I want to just make sure to share here. The first one is around no demographic is a monolith, which might feel obvious, but sometimes our like default mindsets can show up. And so when we're working with groups like farmers, like we worked with farmers in Lincoln this past phase, and thinking all farmers might have a particular set of concerns, right? Or all farmers might have a particular set of conditions that they're dealing with. And we found in conversation that was not the case at all. Similarly, talking with seniors in community, right? Often people will make the mistake, which can cause harm, I think, to just assume like a collective of elders is just a room full of needs that need to be met. And it's not a room full of humans who have their own sets of skills, have a whole lifetime of experience that could be drawn on, wisdom around, place. And a lot of people who are elders in community are witnesses to change over time and place. So just remembering that, there are individuals, right? And we want to celebrate those individualities and get curious about who's in the room with us. Language is definitely key, right? So we continue to work with Rosetta languages, and committing to making sure that we are reaching people in their native language, not just so we can get the information that we necessarily need in a situation, but because by connecting people through their native language, it's also an opportunity for humanizing each other, right? Reaching people's hearts and reaching people where they're at and making them feel comfortable in a space to share their story and share their concerns. So the last thing I just want to share here around like our workshops is looking ahead, what's happening next. So obviously workshops are the center. We will still be out tabling in communities and doing that kind of work. But on the left there, I want to let you all know some of the new workshops that we are pursuing. A couple that are coming up, like I mentioned, before the end of June. We're going to be holding a workshop this coming Monday. It's virtual with Medical Reserve Corps members. So again, thinking about emergency responders in our communities as a key collective of people to make sure we reach and talk to about these issues, because they are the people that aren't just impacted themselves, but also in direct service to communities when there's a crisis. We're going to hopefully work with churches in the next phase. Also, we want to work with the Community Builders is actually a housing services group that works with some of the housing developments in West Roxbury. So we're hopeful to get there with them. And then on the right there, like I said, we're hoping to return. We had mentioned that we worked with Lincoln farmers. So we're hoping to get back to work, not just with the farmers, but with farmers in connection with the broader community in the next phase. And the last thing I just want to mention here, as far as our work looking forward, is CRU has been in a deep relationship with CRWA on this project and has like just immense gratitude for being in connection with you all. And in this next phase, CRU will actually be transitioning our role. So over the next few months, we will still be facilitating workshops and some of those tabling events that I mentioned. And at the same time, we will be transitioning out of the project and working with CRWA on doing that in a way that is slow and trusting and is honoring the process. We will still be involved, just so people know, in that climate compact that was mentioned. And the last thing I just want to mention, as on the last slide, you saw the ways in which CRU is in community. We have a hubs network. We're out doing nature-based projects on the ground. We do preparedness training. So if anybody wants to reach us anytime to work with us on similar projects, don't hesitate to reach out here or to reach out to me directly or the broader team if you have other questions about the flood model project and ideas for projects. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lee. Excellent. All right, we're a few minutes behind where we're hoping to get to questions. So I'm gonna go through these last slides pretty quickly. But just in summary, what are we seeing? A lot of promising solutions. We always like to be solution oriented here. Climate change is a very depressing topic. We acknowledge that. So we always like to be solution oriented. So our promising technical solutions, strong stormwater laws, bylaws, and regulations. We have other webinars focused just on that. So please check that out or reach out because resident support for that makes a huge difference. That your local lawmakers want to know that you actually want that and you've got their back if they go forward with that. Targeted gray system upgrades, as Jenny presented, using ponds to store water. And then these last two, reducing or disconnecting impervious cover and storing runoff. Very effective as long as they're implemented fairly aggressively. So those might be the kind of more major landscape changes that we're going to see in 3 or 4 decades as we hopefully really grapple with this. And then so many promising community engagement and community building solutions, really all of which we just gave such a great summary of. I don't need to repeat, but going into community, making those connections, and, on an individual basis, as Lee pointed out, getting outside of our own circles and making those connections, because we have a lot of common ground. And we really have to be in this together. We've seen the scale of the issue and it's large and we really need to be in this together. And then finally, this is something that came out of our work a year ago, but it still stands. These are our recommendations that we make to our participating communities. Make those strong stormwater regulations, take broad and aggressive action, use science-based approaches. Jenny clearly laid out that sometimes there is a very specific solution that can be very effective in one area. If you have the time and resources up front to figure that out, it may actually save you the time and resources down the line. You won't be investing in something that isn't right for your area. So that's the point of a lot of the technical tools of this project. It allows us to do that. Work with residents to identify and implement projects. Things don't go anywhere if people don't like them. So that's really important. And Lee talked about all the great ways we involve residents, from the very beginning. And then we haven't talked too much about this, but might we need a regional governance structure? That's something Charles River Watershed Association has been thinking about a lot, looking into a lot. We're extremely proud of what we've done on this voluntary basis by getting grant funding. But, is it going to be enough to meet the moment? That's a real question that we have. Or do we actually need to kind of rethink our government structures and start taking action now? That's why we have those priority projects. All right, and with that, we'll transition to questions. Do you want to take the screen share down just for?
Sure.
Okay.
Yes, and we have a couple minutes for questions, and I already got one in the chat, but for everyone else, please feel free to send myself or Joanna your questions, and we will address them here. One of the questions that came through was a question related to the pond studies, the pond analysis, and if any of those accounted for dam removal in the flood modeling. So I'll let Indrani or Janet take that.
Yes, thank you for that question. We did not account for dam removal for those particular ponds that we evaluated. Those ponds were primarily evaluated in the context of those dams being in place and the reservoirs or the pond areas behind the dams being repurposed by reconfiguring the spillway structures and the overflow structures, as well as by being able to draw down the pond in advance of the storm.
Can I just add to that some context? Those ponds were chosen because Charles River Watershed Association had done an extensive dam removal prioritization analysis of all the dams in our watershed. And these ones were deemed not possible for near-term or medium-term removal. So there's, X number of dams. Looked at all of them in a ton of different categories. I mean, this is really an extensive, again, could be its own webinar, an extensive process to prioritize dams for near-term and medium-term removal. There are dozens in those categories. These ones that we looked were essentially what was removed from those lists as not possible for removal. Again, not possible until some decades away. So that's why they were chosen.
Great, thank you. I don't see anything else messages directly to me, but I see, Tim, you have your hand up. I think you should be able to unmute yourself if you have a question.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for a very detailed presentation tonight. I was fascinated by the maps of Dedham, which is not too far away from where I live, but nevertheless is also not all that close. And I'm wondering if there's anything comparable for, say, the Jamaica Plain area, where when I go to your Climate Resilience Hub interactive map, I see no icons or any indication. And the flood maps I've tried to look at have been rather for my area have been rather incomprehensible to me, I have to say. So any advice you could provide there would be of personal interest. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question. Jamaica Plain does drain to the lower Charles. And the city of Boston, specifically Boston Water and Sewer Commission, had already done flooding analyses by the time we started this effort. And that was the same with Cambridge, actually. So we did not duplicate those efforts. I
Well, if you have a link,
appreciate that what you've seen could be confounding. Yes, we can share the link to the Boston Water and Sewer viewer in the chat here. It's a little less well, not to toot our own horn, but we think it's a little less straightforward than the way we present the results, and can actually be a little harder to intuit, but it will give you an idea of flooding in your neighborhood.
okay, guess I'll have to live with it. Thank you.
Any other questions? Feel free to use the chat or raise your hand. I don't know, Joanna, if you got any questions come through on your end, or I guess any of the other speakers.
I did not.
Okay.
Yes, one came in to me. How does the design of a catch basin affect the surrounding soil?
I'll help answer that. I'm interpreting this to be, are you talking about infiltrating catch basins, perhaps? Is that sort of how the question's related? So, right, a typical catch basin is a concrete structure. It's just a big cylinder underground, and there's pipes that go into it and come out of it. And there's a big, at the bottom, there's the dirt that comes off of the road that piles up. When you change that to be an infiltrating catch basin, you do end up, creating space abutting and around the catch basin to put water back into the ground. And you might do that by putting in some gravel and what we call a perforated pipe, which is a pipe that has holes in it. So the catch basin is set up so that the very beginning of the water goes out into the ground around it. The idea is, that water is going back into the ground, but the catch basin still has that sump, as we call it, where the particulate matter and the dirt from the roads does settle out. And there's also what's called a hood on the catch basin, and it goes over the pipe and it keeps floating objects from getting into any piping. So though, presumably if the catch basin is new, it's giving that treatment and protection from particulates getting into the soil. Hopefully I answered that question well enough, and that was the intent of the question.
Thank you. Any more questions from folks? I think one just came through. What's the process of data collection for flood mapping project, and are you looking for more community data? That's a really great question. I'll let Weston Sampson answer that, but I'll also put in the chat some links to our project website, which does have story maps to how the flood viewer, thank you, Joanna, flood viewer got developed, and among other things, the priority sites. But yeah, Indrani or Jenny.
Yeah, I can get started. Thank you for that question. This project currently now in year 4 or more, I mean, more probably year 5. Like it's been the last that the first time we worked on this project was during the helm of COVID in 2020. We had every single year that we have worked on this project, through the different phases and through the different strategies that we have evaluated, there has been extensive data collection. The development of the flood model started out with identifying where we had gaps in data and understanding where the culverts were, where the elevations of the outlet structures of the culverts were. We have gone in, we have been able to go and do extensive field data gathering. The culvert inventory has been has been bolstered through the work that has been done through the project. Many of the efforts that CRWA has led along with community groups we have used the NAC accredited culvert inventory process to get better data. That has led to better understanding of flood risks, the different designs and potential solutions that Jenny and Julie and others have talked about today. We have also done extensive data gathering and by looking at potential site specific solutions. We have not done engineering surveys, but we've certainly done field reconnaissance and some elevation checks at various locations where we have noticed gaps in data with existing drainage mapping and flood mapping. So we have used information that are already available and accessible from the communities through the municipal representatives that have provided the data, but we've also done extensive data collection. And that data collection has been used to better develop the model, but we have also collected data to understand where flooding hotspots are, where critical infrastructure locations are. So we're not just helping build the model, but we're also using that data to assess the impacts of flooding at various locations in the watershed.
Thank you. And relatedly to that, when we are doing some of our priority site engagement work, and Lee had put this in the chat, we are also always looking for residents in and around that priority site to share input and additional data that they might have and with their experience engaging with that site that would help us with the concept design. So there's always opportunities to engage with the project in the future. All right, any other questions coming through for folks? Or anyone would like to raise their hand?
Dira, since questions are slowing a little, or just give folks one last minute to think about it, do you want to pull back up that updated slide?
Yes, let's hope it got updated. Let me see what slide number it was.
25.
Okay, no, it's not updated on my end.
Oh, okay.
I did
I have to
update
like
it.
reshare.
I did update it in the background.
Yeah.
Yeah, I see it updated at my end.
Okay, sorry. I think it's
Oh,
actually, like,
Zoom.
exit the slide and then
Mm.
reshare. Okay, I have it now. So folks can see. This is the correct numbers for the Sawmill Brook Pond and Wetland.
Right, and as I had been verbally explaining, even though the graph didn't match the slide, if you all recall, right, the bar on the left is what we would expect in the catchment, the whole, sub area of the model that this site lives in under baseline flood conditions that could be over 50 million gallons of water, and that could increase to almost 80 million gallons of water by 2070. So this project, because of the size of the catchment and how impervious it is, a lot of impervious cover, only kind of had minimal flood benefits, but still did reduce flooding by 10% in the overall catchment and was able to create 0.8 million gallons of storage. So but did only reduce impervious cover by a very small amount, about 1%. So it does have, and as I said, if you were to use a submodel approach, you would see better benefits from these localized improvements.
Great, thanks, Jenny. All right, I'm gonna pull us all the way to the front. Excuse the quick. All right, since we are at 7:52, I'm gonna wrap up. I don't see any other questions coming through on my end. Just want to say thank you to everyone who's joined us tonight. Obviously, our partners and our speakers for tonight. Joanna had shared the link to our project website where you can find more information. And like you've heard, this project has been going on for almost 5 years. So we have a lot of information to share outside of these slides and tonight's webinar. And you can find all of them on our project website. And then a good shout out and thank you to our funders and our municipal partners listed on the right-hand side of the screen. And as always, you can reach out to myself or Julie if you have any more questions outside of tonight's webinar. And as you are, once we close out the meeting, you will be taken to a browser for a survey that we're still doing for our project to understand folks' experiences and thoughts around green and gray infrastructure as we continue to do the work. And so if you have some time, please take a minute or two to fill out that survey. That would really help us as we continue to do the work. With that, I'd also like to thank everyone for staying a little bit later than our time. I hope everyone has a great evening, and we hope to see you in our next webinar series. All right, thank you, everyone.